Santa Barbara is well known for its natural beauty, active lifestyle, and small-town feel. It also prides itself on its rich history and well-preserved heritage. Thanks to the work of prior generations, our mountain views and beaches are preserved, and our architecture reflects a consistent high standard of design. So why does Santa Barbara look and feel the way it does? It is in large part due to active residents who have been involved with the direction of their city. When they saw something they enjoyed, they fought to preserve it and made efforts to halt changes that were negatively impacting Santa Barbara. For over 40 years, the city has maintained a general plan to preserve and enhance the community's assets. The plan establishes policy direction for the long-term development of the city. It addresses the many components essential to a well-functioning community, such as land use, traffic, housing, public services and safety, and parks and open space. But it has been the public's involvement that has made the plan successful.
Santa Barbara has a history of reflecting the community's views and interests and values.
It was community efforts that led to many of the features that make Santa Barbara unique. The miles of public parks and beaches along our waterfront, like Chase Palm Park and Shoreline Park, Alice Keck Park Memorial Gardens, and the Douglas Family Preserve are all examples of publicly led efforts to preserve our environment.
Situations like Alice Keck Park, where you could just walk through without cost, without anything, just find a parking space and, go. It's safe, it's comfortable, it's beautiful.
Looking to build upon this history of community involvement, the city is launching Plan Santa Barbara.
The name Plan Santa Barbara is really about, it's an active description of what we're trying to do, is get the community out to help plan Santa Barbara.
We have a long history of planning in Santa Barbara. A lot of what we've done starts back to the mid-1920s with the Plans and Planning Committee and one of the first architectural board of reviews in the country and one of the first zoning ordinances in the country.
The 1920s were an important decade for planning in Santa Barbara. Concerned about the overdevelopment of other California coastal cities, citizens voiced their worries to City Council.
The height limits really started coming in about 1924 after the construction of the Granada building. This idea of making Santa Barbara over into the Spanish colonial revival architectural style, hearkening back to the Spanish and Mexican eras here in Santa Barbara. And of course back then Santa Barbara didn't have high rises, so there was this feeling, this movement to kind of control the height of buildings, and the first ordinance for that was passed in '24.
A renewed focus on the city's coastline also took place the same year. Residents supported a bond measure to obtain public land along the city's coast. This purchase resulted in one of Santa Barbara's most notable features, the waterfront.
And so you really have this sort of teamwork between the city and private citizens. Private citizens began to buy up property along the ocean front to preserve it as parkland so it wouldn't become overdeveloped.
With an odd twist of fate, the 1925 earthquake actually enabled the distinct architecture Santa Barbara is known for.
We were very much affected beginning in the late 1800s with the movement to preserve the California missions. A lot of Santa Barbara's got very much involved in that. And then it just started moving forward from that. When we started to rebuild the city in the Hispanic style, the City Hall, El Paseo, and then of course the 1925 earthquake, which to some extent gave city leaders a clean slate upon which they could build in the style that they wanted Santa Barbara to have.
With much of the downtown commercial district leveled, city officials seized the opportunity to enforce a stricter building code, requiring commercial buildings along State Street to conform to a Spanish Moorish style of architecture. It was during this period that one of our most influential civic activists became prominent. Her name was Pearl Chase.
Well, for 70 years, actually, she was the one that everybody turned to. If there was a problem, any environmental problem or architectural problem. And she formed the Santa Barbara Plans and Planning Committee in the 1920s. And they're the ones who had the idea of opening up a storefront after the 1925 earthquake to anybody who, if anybody wanted to rebuild in the Mediterranean style, they would get free plans. And that's why Santa Barbara looks like it does. She is the one who started the Architectural Board of Review to pass on the buildings that would be acceptable for Santa Barbara.
Many of these standards were included in the city's first general plan.
1964 was really the city's first comprehensive general plan, and it's created the foundation that we're still working off today. It's a wonderful, beautiful document that talks about the vision of what Santa Barbara can and should be, and I think that's it encapsulates the character of what we really like about Santa Barbara.
Many of the original principles related to community participation, the natural environment, historic preservation, and transportation still ring true today. Growing environmental awareness was first sparked by the oil spill in 1969 and later in 1974 by the Impacts of Growth study. This citizen-driven study analyzed the environmental, social, and economic impacts of population growth and land use on Santa Barbara and provided information for the public and to policymakers guiding future development decisions. This renewed interest in preserving Santa Barbara's natural beauty brought about the purchase and donation of the old El Mirasol Hotel by Alice Keck Park. The property was given to the city for development as a park, ensuring its preservation. In 1982, voters passed a charter amendment directing the city to live within resources, and 7 years later they passed Measure E.
What the late 1980s really focused in on, I would say, were probably two key issues. One was commercial growth in the city of Santa Barbara, and it led to a real discussion about wanting to slow down the amount of commercial development that could be built, and led to a charter amendment, which we call Measure E, which is in the city charter, voted by the people, which restricts how much commercial growth could occur over a 20-year period. Now, that expires in 2009, 2010, and that's one of the reasons we need to go out and talk to the community is what do we want to do after that commercial growth provision expires in the city charter.
The general plan was last updated in 1989, setting Santa Barbara's course for 2 decades. Again, the public's involvement was crucial for this update. In addition to many other outreach efforts, over 500 people gathered at Earl Warren Showgrounds for a public meeting, which was also broadcast live to the larger community. Recognizing a need for solutions to the area's traffic congestion, in 1995, residents, business, and advocacy groups outlined a transportation plan through the circulation element that balanced the needs of pedestrians, cyclists, public transportation, and automobiles. More recently, in 2005, the housing element was updated with significant input from the community. This brings us to today. With the current plan's update set for 2010, the city is beginning this large task with a major focus on the community outreach portion now.
Without involving the public, I don't think it's going to work. And I think you really need the support behind you to really implement these things. And it's really ultimately the user. If they don't use things the way you think they will, then all of your good intentions are for naught.
Continuing our rich tradition of planning involvement, over the next 2 years, the city will be sponsoring community events, presentations, and workshops to gather input from residents on what they want for the future of Santa Barbara.
The general plan is it's essentially a blueprint for our community for the next several years.
During the next 2 years, the city is hoping to gather input from individuals of all areas of Santa Barbara, of all income levels, age, and experience. This public opinion will be used to revise the general plan to suit the needs of Santa Barbara in the 21st century.
Home modifications and accessibility features are going to be critical to those who want to stay in this area. I think that also disability, while people avoid it until it touches their lives in some way, will become much more in the forefront of our thinking, and barrier-free planning will become more in the forefront of our thinking because it's hard to imagine a senior who doesn't have a reduction in functional capacity.
Policies will be put together regarding the many challenges Santa Barbara faces now and will face in the future.
I would like to see the city really tackle the outer State Street design and traffic problems head on. I would like to see the city really react to the city charter that says we have to live within our resources.
3 overarching issues are residential development, where and how much, commercial development, how much should be allowed, and environmental management, how can we ensure a sustainable future. By getting public input on housing, transportation, economic growth, urban design, and environmental quality, city staff and technical consultants will then be able to analyze a range of growth and development options.
We started with an outreach committee made up of council-selected whole spectrum of 12 different people, including some council, some planning commission members, and a wide range of community members. And they're serving as ambassadors. They're working with us, with the staff, pairing up and going out. We've identified over 100 organizations to start off with that we're doing our initial push towards. And each organization we go to seems to spin off new interests and more groups, and it's really been very well received, and people are giving us lots of good input.
In order to get the broadest input from community members, the city has organized public forums and workshops. Throughout the summer and continuing into the fall of 2008, the extensive outreach program is dedicated to reaching all members of the community.
After we complete round 1 of our community workshop forums, we'll be moving into round 2, which is a public education phase. With the round 1, we'll be creating a summary report and bringing that to boards and commissions. And based on the public input and things we're hearing about what's important in our community, we're planning on working with community members for educational forums. We plan on addressing issues that aren't typically part of general plans, but really are emerging issues of interest in our community. Issues such as global warming and how our energy environment choices we make here could have effects on global warming. There's also the overarching sustainability principles that we want to incorporate in this general plan. And then community health issues is a new issue that we've been hearing about, and decisions about how we maintain and design neighborhoods for walkability and other transportation issues also relate to community health. So we hope to address that and help educate the community in our fall forum phase. And then after that, we'll be moving to our round 2 community workshops again in a similar format of what we've just been completing now. But then we'll be presenting policy options and frameworks, trade-offs, decision-making, how and where do we want the housing to be developed in the community, at how much. And again, a renewing possibly of Measure E and decisions that the City Council will be wanting to look at. We'll be getting public input on those choices in our next round 2 of community workshops after the forums.
Since Plan Santa Barbara looks at how the city evolves and what it might look like in the future, it can only be successful with input from the people it will affect.
We really are at an important turning point with our community's future. The amount of land value that has been created in Santa Barbara, the development pressures for residential real estate. We're really a national housing market, not a local housing market. How do we try to get our arms around that, structure it, and make sure that the development we see over the next 20 or 30 years is what's good for the community and hits some important goals and criteria that we need to see.
The quality of life we all enjoy is a direct result of community involvement. Plan Santa Barbara is the perfect opportunity to help guide your city into the future.